people don't see the Filipino side of me, or people don't see that I'm also Asian as much as I am Black. And so I found that really difficult to contend with because I love my family so much. It often felt like that was never really seen, and I often felt like I needed to kind of like bring it up.
I have had to navigate similar challenges.
Yeah.
And it's so alienating and othering to be questioned or have to justify your Asianness.
And I'm so happy to be mixed. Like, I'm so happy to like have access to like these incredible, like rich worlds and stories.
Hello everybody and welcome to Eastern Hunnies. Today we have a very esteemed guest, friend of the show, friend of life, Nicole Ocran. Woo! Oh my god, word! So before we commence, Melissa is going to do a professional bio.
Let's jump into it. Meet Nicole Ocran, an American author, journalist, podcaster, and fashion influencer based in London who's been sharing her personal style and life online for over a decade. She co-hosts the award-winning podcast Mixed Up, where she and her co-host, Emma Slade Edmondson, engage with race and identity from the mixed race perspective. Together with Emma, Nicole has interviewed the likes of Mel B, Afua Hirsch, Emma Dabiri, Jordan Stevens, Tessa Thompson, Asia Jackson, Michaela Loach, and Travis Alabanza, and so many more over the past 5 seasons. Nicole also co-founded the Creator Union, a union campaigning for fair pay for digital creatives and influencers. Nicole Ocran, welcome to Eastern Hunnies.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and be with you guys. So this is great.
Likewise.
Thank you.
So, Atta Nicole, in your own words, please can you introduce yourself and your background?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Nicole. I am American. I am one of those annoying Americans who lives in London, but I have been here, I feel like, a really long time. I've been here for now, like, it'll be my 14th year, my 14-year anniversary next month. I'm originally from Virginia. That's where I grew up. My dad is from Ghana and my mom is from the Philippines. And yeah, I've been writing a book for the last like 4 years, which is really wild to think about, but it's finally come out. It came out last month, and just being me on the internet and in real life.
It's just been so cool to see you get your flowers and the spotlight you so deserve.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I mean, both you and Emma.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us about the experience of growing up Ghanaian Filipino. Is there one culture that you particularly relate to more than another?
There's so much I could say on that. So I spent my childhood in Virginia, like I mentioned before. My parents are still together. They're still the most brilliant, loving people in the world. But I grew up predominantly around my mom's sisters. So we all lived within about 10 minutes away from each other. So I grew up predominantly around the Filipino side of my family and around my titas, related and not related.
Say less.
Yeah, say less. We feel that.
Yeah. I was really connected to that as a child, as a young person. But also, I guess simultaneously, not that I wasn't connected to being Ghanaian, but growing up Black in the US is much more of a separate thing, I feel like. That's kind of how you're seen, as it's kind of like a more of a blanket thing. It wasn't until I moved to the UK where I was like, oh my gosh, everyone not only do they know, where their parents and their grandparents are from, but it's a thing that people talk about and celebrate Independence Days and things like that. It wasn't really a thing, at least for me, when I was growing up in the 90s in Virginia. My mom, obviously, she cooked for all of my life, so I'm used to eating Filipino food more than I'm used to eating Ghanaian food, just because my dad never made it, so it wasn't really a thing for me. And so yeah, when I'm feeling like I miss her and I miss home, that is where I kind of turn to. But yeah, for the most part, I found it not necessarily hard being mixed, but I knew right away that people don't see the Filipino side of me, or people don't see that I'm also Asian as much as I am Black. And so I found that really difficult to contend with because I love my family so much. I love my mom, I love my titas, like, and so, yeah, it often felt like that was never really seen. And I often felt like I needed to kind of like bring it up or find ways to point to it, I guess, when I was a child and a teenager.
I definitely relate to that being mixed, but from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Like, so firstly, the blanket terms thing is interesting because we had a brief chat about this and we were like, in America, the blanket term is African American.
Yeah.
And there is the term Black British here, but in the UK it feels like there is hyper specificity.
Right.
It's like I'm Jamaican British, I'm Nigerian British, I'm
yeah,
Ghanaian, I'm
totally.
Senegalese. It's hyper specific. And I wonder if it's because, I don't know, being Londoners, we have the exposure to Caribbean community, like
Yeah.
African community, West African, East African.
Totally.
There's much more nuance in the diaspora, whereas everyone is just blanket African American, which is so like repressive, I suppose.
It's really jarring. It's like it feels like it's connected to the country also being so young in comparison to everywhere else, but also simultaneously it's such a hang on from like slavery times, and again wanting to put people into like really specific boxes and finding it easier to just categorize people as one thing. It's hard to grow up with that and then kind of like untangle yourself from that way of thinking. But yeah, I've seen many of the diaspora wars as well on Twitter between like African Americans and like Black Brits. Yeah. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. I was like, the Americans are not getting it right. I'm so sorry. But
Just to go back to what you were saying about not having your Filipino side recognized, I have had to navigate similar challenges. And I guess like the Philippine history is so complex. And for example, both my parents identify as Filipino, but my mum is mostly Spanish. Right. So I've inherited traits from her where people are like, you're too tall for a Filipino, you don't look Filipino, you don't fit the small, petite, like... And
Stereotypical mold.
In the Philippines, everyone's like, where are you from?
Yeah.
And it's so alienating and othering to be questioned or have to justify your Asianness.
Oh, absolutely. What I found really helped me a lot was learning more about like the indigenous people of the Philippines, where I was like, oh, this is so it's so like liberating and so freeing to see actual Black people in the country. It made me feel more connected in a way that I'd never even known about it as a child. And then one of the other guests that we had on the podcast, Asia Jackson, is also mixed. She is Black American. I think she's also Indigenous Filipino, if I'm not mistaken. But seeing her and seeing how she talks about the history and how she talks about even the way that, you know, colorism is an issue in the country, it made me feel like, okay, there's more here for me, where I often feel like you were saying, I don't get to claim certain things because I don't look a certain way, or it's easy for people to dismiss me because I don't look a certain way, and I don't speak the language, and I don't know Tagalog very well, or any of the languages. I then feel like I'm often trying to just like grasp at things. I'm getting better at that. I'm getting better about feeling more confident about it. Because it's something that I'm really proud of. But I often, again, as a mixed person, I often feel like it's something that easily...
You have to justify as well.
Yeah. And like there are really easy ways for people to be like, oh, well, you're not this because, you know.
But by the same token, the Philippine vocabulary is so rich. There are so many words for mixed people. There's like negrita, chinita, mestiza, moreno, you know, and it's integral. To be mixed is integral because the Philippines is just a bunch of islands tied together by the Spanish. And you have the Bajau who are dark skin, and then you have very light skin in, you know, wherever. And it's interesting that the vocabulary serves all these hyper-specific racial, ethnic differences, whereas like the English language doesn't have that so much.
In my research into it, like, we weren't the Philippines. It was just a collection of islands. And it wasn't until post-colonialism that we were kind of forced to become one country. Speaking on, like, you mentioned about colorism, we know firsthand that colorism is very, like, pervasive in Philippines. And can you describe what that is for listeners who might not understand what colorism is and, like, why it's problematic?
Yeah, of course. So colorism it's described as like the sister to racism. And it's essentially treating people with lighter skin tones. There's also texturism as well. So like looser hair, looser curl patterns, better than people who are darker skinned. So that's something that is a huge topic of conversation, of course, in the Black community. It's also a big thing in South Asian and East Asian cultures as well. It's hard to contend with, I think, also when people are doing that thing where it's like lumping everything in together as one thing. It's hard to combat, I feel like, as well, when it's within your own groups and people within groups that you feel like you're meant to be a part of. It's a really difficult concept, but it's important to talk about.
Do you have any experience navigating that in your life?
Growing up in the States, I grew up in like a predominantly white environment, so I went to predominantly white schools. My neighbors were white, my friends are white. I didn't really think too much about colorism as a concept. Obviously, back then I was only a kid, but also like when you're just perceived as like the Black kid amongst all the other Black kids, whether or not you're mixed it never really came up. But then the older I got, I think that's when you kind of can understand a little bit more of like the discrimination that happens and how your privileges can gain you access to certain things or afford you certain things that others might not. The only real like life comparison I have, of course, is like with my dad, like growing up with him, and he's like a dark-skinned African man. He's also a man, so it's different, but like he definitely gets treated in a certain way versus me. So my dad, he moved from Ghana to the UK, helped his sisters move here to London, and then he was like, I hate this place. It's too gray and cold. He's like, I'm leaving. So he moved to the US. But so his sisters all stayed here, and my cousins like are all Londoners as well. And so honestly, truly, it wasn't until I moved to the UK where I like really had more of an understanding of like how colorism like plays a role, and how certain women like in line at the club like get let in over others. Like it was like that kind of explicit. I don't go outside like that anymore, but I was like, I don't know if it's changed, but yeah, I think people's inherent biases, I think it's hard to kind of like untangle that once you see it, I think you really kind of, you can't unsee it.
How long have you been in London?
13 years. I've lived like everywhere except West. So when I first moved to London, I lived in Homerton.
Okay.
So I was an East London girl for a while. And then from there I moved
Homerton B.
Yeah. I was like Homerton before it was cool.
How do you feel? Do you feel like having lived in London for so long, it's affected your identity in some way?
It's so funny because there are some things I feel like, gosh, I'm like really a Londoner, but then other ways where I'm like, I'm still so American. But yeah, like just in terms of my sense of humor about things and like my ability to kind of like laugh at myself and not take things super seriously, I feel like I've adopted from being from Brits and like being around Brits for so long. But also like my earnestness and like and my self-belief as well, as in like I can do anything, like no one can tell me otherwise, is like also I feel like such an inherently American dream. Like when you're a kid in the States, I feel like they're like, you can be president. And you're like, okay, great. I'll be president one day. Like, it's like that kind of just like instilling that belief in your mind. I can't imagine going back to live in Virginia, for example. Like it just would be so...
You're a Brit now.
Yeah. The pace of life is different, but also like, again, the kind of attitude and mentality of like people that live there, certain people that live there, is just not, I don't vibe with that.
On the topic of you could be president, Kamala Harris, Black and Asian.
Yeah.
We have Miss Universe Philippines 2024, Chelsea Manalo, Black Filipino. We have Miss Iloilo, Alexi Brooks, Black and Filipino. How does it feel for you to see them in places of stature, to be celebrated? And then also, like, how do you feel about the reception towards Kamala Harris as well?
It's huge. It's huge for me. Like I think on a representation level, I was being interviewed for something else, and somebody asked me a question about just mixed representation overall, and I remember saying, you know, I remember seeing like interracial couples and kind of like mixed families here and there growing up, but it was like never my family specifically was never portrayed, not even a Black and Asian family.
I mean, there's, sorry to interrupt, Kamala Simmons. Yeah, and yeah.
True.
She was like my idol. She still is. But that's
she is a legend. She is absolutely a legend. No, do you know what was huge for me? Brandy Cinderella.
Yeah.
And Pablo, what's his name? Paolo.
Maltaban?
Yes.
Oh God, I used to watch that every Christmas.
I loved, and then they put it on Disney Plus. I was like, I'm sat. I was like, I'll watch this now for the rest of my life. But seeing these women specifically, and seeing them in, you know, these really incredible positions of power and esteem, and I just feel like that's something that my younger self was always looking for. I just didn't think we really existed, you know, outside of my own family. I just felt like a little bit like of an anomaly. So seeing this now is just so wonderful. I feel like my childhood self was just like singing. But Kamala is an interesting one, again, being a Black woman, being an Asian woman who's also running for president. Yeah. I think you will never escape the ridiculous, like baseless comments and accusations, and again trying to pigeonhole and trying to do, you know, her previous political work and like her policies and stuff aside, like she has done everything that she was required to do. Like she is literally the vice president, but people will still, you know, dismiss her on the basis of being a woman.
Yeah, without all the added.
And on the intersections of race on top of that. Like, it's just really wild. I'm excited about the Black and Asian girlies that I'm seeing.
Blasians.
The Blasians. Yeah. Well, this is the other thing. I was like, I was saying this to my other friend where I was like, Blasian was like not a term that like people took seriously. In the States, it's like so like unserious.
Like cringe.
Yeah. Whereas like now it's like funny and like it's like we're taking it back. I'm here for it.
There's Blasian, there's Wasian, there's Eurasian, the Wasian community. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Did you see that TikTok? Sorry, I'm derailing this interview, but did you see that TikTok of the white mother who was like, what did she say? She was like, I'm from, I don't know where she was from. She's like, my husband does, I think, Vietnamese. And she was like, can you stitch this? Because I really want to know what our kids are going to look like if you're Wasian.
What?
Yeah. She was like, I want to see what my kids look like.
What?
I know. And everyone was like, hi, hon.
Oh my God.
This isn't what you
It's
think
giving,
it is.
I want mixed race babies.
It's really disturbed.
Can you unpack why that's disturbed for the listener?
I think so often, it's a really strange one because, again, I don't know when this trend began, but the idea that mixed children are somehow an accessory to your life is, they're very exoticized, they're very fetishized in a very creepy way. It so often, I find, happens with, unfortunately, with white people where they think that that's somehow the mix of their child either makes them more beautiful, but also like affords them some level of credibility. There are a lot of, you know, white mothers, white parents that I know who are not like that at all. It's like also mixed children are all kind of held up as a symbol for like racial,
racial utopia.
Like racial utopia that like we're not we're not there yet. But that's a lot of burden as well to place
100%.
on a baby.
Also, I remember like ASOS upcome era 2014-15, every single model was mixed race with green or blue eyes. There was such a violent
Tumblr era.
Tumblr era violent fetish for like mixed race preference. And like, you know, the term biracial or mixed in the UK seemed exclusively reserved for black, white. And that's it. I mean, I didn't even use the term for myself until, you know, the past couple of years that have gone by as the vocabulary built. But back in that era, everyone was fetishizing that particular look. Brands were hopping on the bandwagon. And I think that really contributed to like this cultural obsession and fetishization of best of both.
It became a really twisted way for brands to be like, oh, okay, we can tick our diversity and inclusion boxes because we've got this like best of both worlds, like you're saying, like we've done the work because
like
we've only had to find these people.
Recognizably white.
Exactly.
You know, but it's not too other.
Yeah, exactly. It's not too other that it's jarring for other people to get on board with it.
Is, in your experience working in fashion, in the trenches of fast fashion and e-com at that time, did you have any experiences around like model selects and casting that were particularly problematic?
I would say yes. I would say yes. Pre-2020, it was a different time in the industry. I think like the murder of George Floyd really fucking shook things up in like a healthy way, in a way in which was necessary. It's a crying shame that it had to get to there, but back in that day there was a big, and there still is, colorism. Like I feel like the conversation around like lighter skinned people, like minorities, are preferred over like, you know, more like darker skinned models because of, I think, like their closeness to whiteness, and therefore like they're more accessible, you know. In fashion, the models are always like, if there's two models on set, the second model will always be white. Do you know what I mean?
This happens to me all the time on like influencer related trips, or like if I'm at a dinner or something. So often I'm like either the only one or I'm like one of two. And I'm just like, do no other black or brown people exist? Like,
I guess
it's such an odd...
We're all the same.
Yeah, exactly. We're all the same. And as long as you have one, then...
Yeah, it's like, at least there's the poster child for like, you know.
I remember an instance where you were really upset and sent a screenshot to the Eastern Hunnies chat where it was like a brand and you were casting models and you put forward, I think it was an Indian model, a dark-skinned model, someone else. And the brand came back with, these two don't look premium enough. And we switched them out.
Conversation very...
Oh my God.
And we were like, what? And you were like, another day on the job.
Yeah.
Even, you know, doing fashion influencer stuff, like, it's so rare. I'm not saying that, you know, I know everyone has their niches and, you know, this kind of thing. But I find it really interesting because I'm like, I'm a 36-year-old woman living in London, probably one of the most expensive places to live in the world. And I'm not saying, you know, I'm living a lavish lifestyle. I'm like, but I can afford things, and I'm very grateful and blessed to be able to do so. And I find it so interesting how like these brands won't even look at you because just because you're not everyday Chanel bag, they're just like, well, you clearly can't afford it. And I'm just like, how strange.
And I think this sentiment is prevailing across media as well. Like it's prevalent in film and TV.
In books.
In books, yeah.
Like black and brown people don't read.
Yeah. And there was...
That's a whole other concept.
That's a whole episode in itself.
That's a whole episode.
But in the book, The Good Immigrant, there's a short story within that, and I'm not sure who wrote it, but there's a school teacher is like teaching her class, teaching English, and then a student from minority background writes a story that represents you as an individual in a main character role. And then the student was like, oh, but miss, there are no like black and brown people in books.
Oh my God.
And it's just a bit like when you're constantly left out of the narrative and conversation, like it hurts. And it's also like, you know, it leaves scars.
And that's how people self-other.
Exactly.
Yeah. And minimize themselves. When you're constantly left out, it feels like you can't access those spaces.
Absolutely.
Why are we not pushing, you know, like black and brown people, not just in front of the lens, but behind and also in positions of authority? Because in fashion specifically, there are so many bodies in front of the camera, you know, that are from underrepresented backgrounds. Yet and
that's so crucial.
it's not the case. And how are we ever going to tell authentic stories if that doesn't happen?
I do think it starts with curriculum, because I remember being at school and it's like, Tom has 2 apples. What happens? Lucy is going to the supermarket to buy shampoo. And when I was helping my cousin's son, my nephew, with his homework, his maths homework, his book was like, Ahmed goes to the shop, Kezia, blah, 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 and like Azinga. And I'm like, oh,
That's amazing.
wow. I didn't have this.
Yeah, no.
And
God,
I don't know how mountains were moved in that respect.
Yeah.
Especially in London, you can look at a nursery or primary school class and be like, this is a post-racial utopia. But then you look at the curriculum and it's like, why are we still studying Seamus Heaney for the 90th year in a row?
Chaucer and Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And there are so many great non-white British authors to include in the curriculum, like minds, inventions, innovators, etc.
Akala, like petition to like embed him in the curriculum, natives.
Yeah.
Petition to involve natives in the British curriculum.
A genius.
Yeah.
No, truly. Black Shakespeare.
Yeah.
2008. What a banger.
Speaking of like British, like UK versus US, is there a difference to how you're perceived in both spaces?
I think so. I definitely think so. I think my being mixed or being biracial, I guess, it was very quickly brought up to me right away when I came here. Like I said, you know, being in Virginia, like growing up there, that wasn't really a thing that people would say, or like, I was never corrected. I would always just be grouped in with the other black kids. Whereas here, it's like and I'll say, you know, mostly black people will make a point to tell me right away, like, oh, but you're not black, you're mixed.
So like,
It's hard to then have to be like, yes, I am mixed, but I'm also black. Like, and I know people, it's hard because I know people hate that. It's difficult for other people to like hold space for that. I get it. I feel like a lot of people aren't ready to, they're like, we can't move on from like, the issue is blackness. Like, the issue is our blackness that we need to protect. We can't have this separate conversation, which is about being mixed. But yeah, I feel like because back home in the States, there was like so much around, obviously, racial mixing and like the 1-drop rule and like those other things. It's kind of like people understand the concept of being black and being light-skinned, for example. Whereas here, I think also because, like we were saying before, it's like people know where their families come from and they know, you know, all of this history and like their family trees, etc. Because there's clarity there, that means like they want me to be clear. They're like, we want you to be clear about who you are. It used to really bother me, but now I'm kind of like, I can just accept it for what it is. Like, no one can tell me about who I am. Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting what you said about the 1-drop rule in the US and how blackness is a collective experience, because who cares what shade you are, the police are going to fire.
Yeah.
And it's like in the Philippines, obviously you have all these disparate ethnicities and tribes on different islands, but the Philippines is a nation not united by anything other than their collective experience of oppression under colonialism. So it's kind of same, where only when you like pan out and see the diaspora and the colorism chats and the class and the privilege that it becomes a much more complex conversation.
But I also feel like that's what the 1% want us to do. They want us to like rally against each other and like be divisive within our communities. Fundamentally, I do believe like no one is a monolith. We all contain multitudes. Within like the subject of race, can we not just have more compassion towards one another? Like whatever your mix and shade is, because like if I encounter another mixed Filipino person, then I would be like, I understand the struggle. Yeah. And so I would hold space for them as opposed to like belittle them.
I think that's really important. And I feel the same. I often worry that because of these really reductive ways of having a conversation about mixedness or just race in general, I often really worry that it's just another tool for them to use against us and be like, oh, look, they don't even know. That's like one of my fears. I'm just like other people like seeing this conversation and being like, they can use it as like a weapon against us. But yeah, more compassion, more empathy is always needed.
Let's not forget like the enemy, the root of all of this is white privilege and capitalism, where, you know, like in this country, everyone's saying get the immigrants out. It's like the immigrant's not your problem. The problem is the capitalist who owns the business, who wanted cheaper labor from the immigrant. So they're very happy to let their fired worker blame the immigrant as a scapegoat, when actually it's capitalism that's the problem. And also in society, rewarding people with their closeness to whiteness is what creates this light skin privilege, colorism, all these things. And race is a social construct anyway, which is why it's like, why are we all fighting about this? If you could be white passing as an Indian person and someone is fine to let you in a pub, but someone looks more overtly Indian and they don't want to be let in, it's like your bloodstream is the same, your genetics are the same. This is such a silly conversation.
Like we share like DNA with a mushroom. Like can we not just like can we not
Isabelle Landy.
but like can we not just like be? Can we not just like exist? Can we just not exist?
He's a fun guy.
To lighten the conversation. But what is the best thing about being mixed up?
I always say like my favorite thing about being mixed is how connected I feel and like how wrapped up in love I feel with like my family. My own personal journey aside with it, I've never wavered in the knowledge of like how much they love me, how much they care for me. And that's made me feel like so connected and like rooted to these countries, to these parts of myself that I'm so proud of. And yeah, it's something that I've never, like growing up, I was very much like, oh, I'm just like, you know, a typical American kid. And like I had a very specific idea of like what that looked like and who I had to be. And I'm so happy to be mixed. Like I'm so happy to like have access to like these incredible, like rich worlds and stories.
And like just to add as well, I think with like in our like friendship, I think so we know each other from Emma Slade Edmondson, friend of the pod. But I mean, I think when I was first starting out in like fashion, there was no representation from like black and brown people in that space. And especially a space when it advocated for like people and the planet. And Emma was really like that person for me. And so like I cold emailed her, like not really expecting anything. And like she, throughout the years, just has shown me so much kindness and warmth. And what she has sown is like community. And 100%. Like harking back from what we said about like the 1% and maybe like individualism, like I think it's really lovely to be in this space of friendship and community and sharing and like caregiving to one another. Mel works with like you and Emma, and you know now you're on our podcast, and like it's just like so giving and caring. It's just great to see.
Like I was saying earlier, this kind of connectedness was not something that I had growing up. Like had friends, have really close friends, but to be able to speak about these things and be really open about the struggles faced, but also like the incredible, like the amazingness that it is to be Filipino. Like I didn't really have that. So yeah, it's really opened up so much for me.
Well, it's been gorgeous having you speak to us.
Thank you for having me.
And it's been a fun experience having, you're like the award-winning podcaster. So it's
Jewel of the season.
I'll take that. I'm waiting for my Bridgerton.
No, she's so ready. So we're closing out by asking everyone, just keeping it short and sweet, if you were to write a love letter to the diaspora, what would you say?
We are such an incredibly multifaceted, multi-talented, brilliant group. And yeah, I think what I would say to them is to keep thriving, keep following your dreams, trust in yourself, and yeah, just keep being your incredible, unwavering, beautiful selves.
Work. Plug anything and everything, girl. Where can we find you? Yeah.
You can find me personally on Instagram, Twitter. We're not calling it X. TikTok under my name, Nicole Ocran. You can also find me and Emma on our podcast, which is called Mixed Up, wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, all of the podcast streaming platforms. You can also buy our book, The Half of It, from all good bookstores. You can order it online from Amazon, Waterstones, bookshop.org. Yeah, those are all the places you can find me.
Thank you, Nicole. It's been an absolute honor.
Oh, likewise. Thank you for having me.
So to close, thank you everybody for listening, watching, and all of the above. Thank you for your time, energy, and we love you.
We'll catch you on the next episode.
Salamat!
Bye.